January 1909, New Jersey. The storm came down like a punishment. Snow hammered the rooftops, drifts swallowing fence posts whole. The Pine Barrens stretched endless and black, the trees groaning under the weight of ice. A patrolman pulled his coat tight, lantern swinging as he trudged down a frozen lane. But he wasn't alone. Something had left tracks ahead of him. They were hoofprints. They left deep, clean cuts in the snow, but not like any horse he had ever seen. These tracks were strange. They led over fields, through hedges, straight across a chicken coop roof without breaking stride. The officer stopped, snow creaking under his boots. His lantern flickered, dancing over claw marks gouged in a wooden beam. And then he heard it. A scream. Shrill, piercing, like metal tearing apart. The sound came from above. He snapped his lantern upward, and he's looking around, and caught in the glow he saw a shadow with wings stretched wide. It had glowing eyes and something curling behind it, kind of like a serpent's tail. The officer stumbled back, crossing himself. The thing shrieked again. It spread its wings and then vanished into the storm. Locals whispered about what he saw that night. Some said it was a demon. Others said it was the cursed child of Mother Leeds, come back to haunt the land of its birth. And in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, that story has never gone away. Welcome back to Legends May Live, where we explore the strange, the mysterious, and the downright eerie. I'm Drew, and today's story is about a monstrous creature that lurked through the Pine Barrens of New Jersey called the Jersey Devil. But before we get into that, just a quick note that though it's based on a true story, some accounts may conflict, and so just take it as entertainment. To understand the Jersey Devil, we have to go back, long before 1909, back to a time when the New Jersey Pine Barrens were wild, just an unsettled frontier, all the way back to 1735. At that time, colonial America was a place just steeped in superstition. The people living back then, witches weren't fairy tales, they were real threats. Devils, curses, omens, they haunted every shadow. And in the dense woods of southern New Jersey, one family's name became forever bound to the devil himself. Her name was Deborah Leeds. Most people just called her Mother Leeds. She and her husband, Japhet, they had already had 12 children. That was 12 mouths to feed in a land that gave little back. Life in the early 1700s Pine Barrens was harsh. Japhet worked, but there was never enough. And Deborah bore the endless weight of raising a dozen children in the wilderness. It seemed like a constant fight just to stay alive. The soil was sandy and poor. It was too acidic to grow reliable crops. Winters there were long and bitter. And summers weren't much better. They swarmed with biting insects and wolves and black bears, wildcats. They all prowled the forest. A child could easily vanish into those woods and never return. There were no towns nearby, no markets to buy food or doctors to call when sickness struck. So a mother was always busy. She cooked and hauled water, made clothes, kept the fire alive, and nursed the sick, all while raising children. It was especially difficult for someone like Mother Leeds, with a dozen children inside a one-room cabin. But somehow she managed to do it. She got by one day at a time. But when she found herself pregnant once again, the story goes that she broke. In the darkness of her cabin, she cursed the unborn child. "Let this one be a devil," she whispered. Then, several months later, on a stormy night, that curse came to fruition. Witnesses say that the baby was born normal, just like any other child, with its tiny 10 little fingers and toes and round, squishy body. But within minutes, it began to change. Its body stretched, twisting, growing at an unnatural speed. Cloven hooves kicked from its tiny feet, and leathery wings unfurled from its back. A serpent's tail thrashed against the floor, and then it let out a blood-curdling scream. Some say it killed the midwife. Others say it clawed at everyone in the room before looking at Mother Leeds in the eyes with this cold glare, and then it leapt onto the fireplace mantel and then out the window. Others say that the child shot up the chimney and out into the storm. From that night forward, either way, the people of New Jersey whispered of the cursed child that roamed the woods, the Leeds devil. And the Pine Barrens became its kingdom. Even today, they stretch across more than 1 million acres of southern New Jersey. Just this endless forest of sandy soil and swampy bogs. But back in the 1700s, they were even wilder. Settlers described them as a no man's land. Families who ended up there were usually the ones that had nowhere else to go, and they became known as Pineys. Pineys hunted, fished, made moonshine, and scraped a living out of the land that no one else wanted. Outsiders whispered about them. They said that they were strange, inbred, and lawless. They were said to have dealings in witchcraft, and whether those rumors were true or not, it didn't matter. Their reputation stuck. The Pine Barrens became a place of mystery. During the Revolution, deserters hid there, and during Prohibition, bootleggers ran liquor through the trees. Criminals, smugglers, and outcasts, they all found shelter in the pines. If you wanted to disappear, the Barrens would take you in. And through it all, the legend of the Leeds Devil grew. Farmers claimed it slaughtered livestock in the dead of night. Travelers said they heard high-pitched, inhuman screams echoing through the trees. Others swore they saw shapes darting across the treetops under the full moon. The Pine Barrens were already feared by those who lived outside them, but with the devil said to stalk it, swamps and shadows, the woods became something else entirely. It was a place where superstition and reality blurred, where you were never quite comfortable walking alone. Then, in the winter of 1909, when the legend of the Jersey Devil clawed its way out of folklore and into headlines, it started small. Farmers woke up to find livestock torn apart. Their chickens were gutted in their coops. Sheep had their throats slashed. Farmers can usually tell what's gotten their animal based on the attack marks or tracks, but in this case, it wasn't so easy to identify because, for one, the normal predators don't slash throats, they bite and tear. But then there are the tracks. They didn't match any wolves or bears or big cats. They were hoofprints. Forgetting that hoofed animals are typically prey animals, not predator, these particular hoofprints were deep and clawed like something that was part goat and part dragon. Then came the tracks in the snow. Day by day, they spread, first in one village, then in another. There were hoofprints on rooftops, hoofprints leading straight across frozen rivers without breaking the ice somehow. Hoofprints that ended at a second-story window, like the creature had just peered inside and then vanished back to the trees. Pretty soon, the newspapers caught wind, and the headlines rolled out. Strange monster roams South New Jersey. Another said, the Leeds Devil returns. And the reports got pretty bizarre. In Camden, the trolley rattled along its route. Cars were filled with the sound of wheels sparking against the rails and the hum of conversation. And then suddenly, the passengers were jolted by a sound that was both terrifying and confusing. It was just this inhuman, piercing scream that tore down from the sky. The trolley windows shook as a shadow swept over the roof. Passengers couldn't believe what they were seeing, and they screamed and covered their heads, and something with wings scraped against the top, rattling the car like this giant clawed hand dragging across the tin. The conductor, of course, slammed on the brakes, and sparks showered the tracks as the trolley screeched to a stop. People stumbled into the aisles, holding one another and just looking toward the roof, like, is this thing going to tear through it at any moment and just take us? Like, what is this thing? And for a moment, everything was silent, and they kind of had this wave of relief starting. But then the shriek came again, and this time it was so close they could feel it in their chests. But to the relief of the passengers, the thing took off. And in Bristol, Pennsylvania, just across the river, a police officer had heard this thing coming, and he looked over to see what's happening, and he spotted movement on the rooftops. There was something leaping from one building to another now. He drew out his revolver and steadied his cold hands with his breath frosting in the winter air, took aim, and fired. The shots cracked through the night, and bullets slammed into the figure. He could see them hit it. But the thing is, this thing didn't fall. It just turned its head toward him with its glowing red eyes and wings unfolding like black sails. It let out a scream that froze him in place, and then it launched upward and just lifted into the air, kind of like a kite catching the air, and just effortlessly floated up into the air, vanishing in the storm. The officer lowered his gun, his hands are trembling, and for the first time in his career, he wasn't sure bullets meant anything at all. And after this, schools closed, mills shut down, parents kept their children locked inside. On the third day, even clergymen claimed to have seen it. In Trenton, a group of men reported chasing a long-necked, winged figure into the woods. When they got back, they were pale and visibly shaken. Though they couldn't agree on exactly what they saw, they all swore it wasn't human. Panic rolled across the state like thunder. The brave and skeptical alike formed hunting parties armed with rifles, dogs, and sometimes even pitchforks. Entire mobs marched into the Pine Barrens, just determined to bring this thing back. In Gloucester, a hunting party swore they had finally had the devil cornered. The men spread out through the snow, rifles raised up, just waiting for this thing to make itself known. And as their breath is steaming in the night air, then came the sound. Wings beating hard and a shriek tearing through the trees. The creature burst into view. It was black against the moonlight. One man leveled his rifle, aimed, and fired. The crack of the shot echoed through the woods, and he swore the bullet tore straight through it. But the thing didn't fall. Instead, it screamed. It was a sound so high-pitched and ear-piercing it rattled their bones, as if it was mocking them to let out a laugh, just a horrible, rasping crackle before it spread its wings and shot into the sky. The men stood frozen, their rifles down at their sides, as the devil vanished into the storm above. Another group followed Hoofprints deep into the Pine Barrens. At first, the trail was easy. Sharp, clawed imprints in the snow leading them deeper and deeper in the woods. But then the tracks stopped. The men circled the spot, swinging their lanterns around, boots crunching in the snow, and there was just no sign of where it had gone. No broken branches, no marks in the drift, just silence. The dogs were pulling on their leashes, and suddenly they whined and refused to move forward. Their ears flattened, their tails tucked, bodies trembling like some horrible danger was present. And it was nothing that the men could see, though. So they just stood there, lanterns flickering in the dark, staring at the empty ground where the devil's trail simply ended. And ultimately, that was that. They took a cue from the dogs and decided it was probably a good time to head back. Then one of the largest mobs, nearly 100 strong, marched into the pines armed with shotguns, clubs, and torches. As the night wore on, the forest came alive with sound. There was something circling them from above. They could hear heavy wing beating through the trees, screeches tearing down from above. Their torches shook when the men shouted. They just fired blindly into the branches overhead, hoping to get whatever it was. But the thing never came down. It stayed just out of sight, circling like it's taunting them. By dawn, the men stumbled back into town empty-handed, but each of them swore that the devil had been there, just above the tree line, watching and waiting all night long. Not every hunting party came back with tales of terror, though. One group swore that they had shot the thing, and then they rushed into the thicket where the body had fallen. And what they found wasn't a monster, it was just a massive bird. Some said a crane, others say a turkey vulture, wings broken, feathers matted. The men dragged it into town, shouting that they had killed the devil, but as daylight fell on the carcass, the locals just shook their heads. This wasn't the Leeds devil. This was just a bird. Ugly, sure, but just an ordinary bird. The hunters' faces burned with humiliation as their prize turned into ridicule. And that night, as they slunk home, the shriek of something far larger echoed through the pines, reminding them that the Jersey Devil was still out there. But, in spite of the large number of hunters, none ever returned with proof. For a short time, the Jersey Devil dominated the news cycle. It was spotted in more than 30 towns. It was always a topic of conversation and sort of hushed whispers, but just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The hoofprints melted and the sightings ceased. The Leeds Devil had vanished back into the wilderness. But the fear it left behind, that never truly went away. The panic of 1909 eventually faded, but the Jersey Devil didn't. The decades that followed brought fresh reports, each one a reminder that something still stalked the Pine Barrens. In the 1930s, farmers whispered of a winged creature circling their barns at night. Livestock was found dead, throats torn open, bodies half-drained. Some swore that they saw glowing eyes watching from the tree line when they lit their lanterns to investigate. In 1951, Gibbstown was rattled by a news report. A group of children were playing near a schoolyard when suddenly they got this eerie feeling like they were being watched. One of them looked up and froze. Perched on a rooftop, wings folded tight, was something watching them. It wasn't anything that they had ever seen before. It had a horse-like head and its eyes glowed red. It stretched out its leathery wings and they were wider than a man was tall. Then, with a rush of wind, it landed near the playground. The children screamed and scattered, their shouts just echoing down the streets as they bolted for home. And by the time they reached their parents, they were hysterical and trembling. They could barely speak to describe what it was without breaking down, but they all told the same story. It had glowing eyes, huge wings, and hooves. That night, mothers barred their doors and fathers sat up with shotguns, and Gibbstown fell into a fearful silence. For days afterward, most parents kept their kids home from school, convinced that the creature was waiting just beyond the schoolyard fence. The 1960s brought another wave. Residents of Mays Landing reported hearing piercing screams ripping through the pines at night. A group of construction workers claimed to see a massive winged figure swoop low over their site. One man said it knocked his hat clear off his head. Then, in 1972, a woman driving on a lonely stretch of road near the Barrens slammed on her brakes when something enormous had stepped out into the glow of her headlights. She described it as a kangaroo-shaped creature with wings folded tight against its back. It turned its head toward her car. Its eyes glowed red like hot coals. When she tried to drive around, the thing leapt and slammed onto her roof. She screamed as the metal groaned under its weight, and by the time she sped into town, the roof of her car was scarred with deep gouges, like the thing had been trying to rip its way inside. And still the sightings came. Hunters spoke of being stalked in the pines. Hikers heard screams echoing through the trees. State troopers, trained rational men, filed official reports describing encounters that they couldn't explain. By the 20th century, the Jersey Devil had hundreds of witnesses across generations, all describing the same winged, hooved, screaming creature that refused to die. Yet, for every sighting, there's a skeptic ready with an explanation. Some say the Jersey Devil was nothing more than mass hysteria. That 1909 panic, just fueled by sensational newspapers eager to sell copies. They said the real explanation was simple. A kangaroo escaped from a traveling circus, and perfectly normal, logical people saw the furry creature hopping along the ground with its massive feet and mistook it for a leathery, hooved, and winged beast flying through the air, emitting a sharp, ear-piercing scream. I mean, who hasn't made that mistake at least once? Others thought it was probably a misidentified native animal. The Pine Barrens are home to sandhill cranes, tall, long-necked birds with a wingspan over 6 feet and a shriek that sounds eerily human. An owl glimpsed in the wrong light maybe could look monstrous. Even deer, startled and rearing, could leave tracks mistaken for the hooves that people had seen. It is, after all, logical to think that people living for generations among these animals would mistake them for a dragon-like beast, and with the sandhill crane's eerily human-like shriek, it's an easy leap to believe that sound that so many people had heard was the non-human sounding shriek that no one recognized over hundreds of years. Either way, none of those animals could explain claw marks left on barn roofs, or the way that witnesses across centuries describe the same creature, hooved, winged, glowing-eyed, shrieking like something not of this world. Perhaps it's a species we haven't quite identified yet. Folklorists argue that the Jersey Devil may have been born from something deeper, a fear of the wilderness itself. The Pine Barrens were dark, lawless, and unforgiving. To outsiders, the people who lived there were already branded as strange. The Pineys were whispered about as if they weren't quite human. What better villain of the forest than a monster lurking in the shadows? And yet, there's another possibility. Some believe that Mother Leeds' curse was more than just a story, that in a moment of despair, she really did summon something into this world. A creature not bound by flesh or reason, but by the weight of superstition and fear. A curse given form. And if curses can walk the earth, maybe the Jersey Devil never needed explanations at all. It never faded into history, but rather, it adapted. In 1964, a zoo in Philadelphia offered a $10,000 reward for anyone who could capture it alive, but no one ever collected the prize. By the 1970s, the Jersey Devil had made its way into pop culture. When New Jersey needed a name for its new NHL hockey team, there was no contest. They became the New Jersey Devils, a reminder that the state's most famous resident wasn't a governor or an industrialist, but a monster. Festivals sprang up, souvenirs were sold. It became a mascot, a joke, a piece of regional pride as well. But in the Pine Barrens, it was never just a story. Even now, people report seeing it. Hikers claim to hear it scream in the trees. Campers describe its glowing red eyes just beyond the firelight. Hunters have returned pale, swearing something was stalking them all night. And then there are the stories you'll never see in the newspapers, the ones told quietly over bar counters or around campfires, by people who swear they don't believe in monsters, except for the thing that they saw that one night deep in the Barrens. The truth is, the legend has become inseparable from the land itself. Step into the pines after dark, and the silence closes in. The trees blot out the stars. Every twig snap sounds like footsteps. And if you're unfortunate, maybe you'll hear it, the shriek, under the thunder of wings. Hoofprints where they shouldn't be. The Devil of Leeds still hunting. And that's it for today's episode of Legends May Live. If you enjoyed the story, please remember to like, subscribe, and share it with a friend. Until next time, if you find yourself in the pines, keep your head on a swivel, because legends may live.